didn't think I'd be talking about Sega's recent antics for a third time, but all good trilogies come in threes. So here we are, with a conclusion to the Sega saga I started back in November, when they announced they'd be delisting most of their historic games, news which really ticked me, and I know a lot of you, off. I've been a Sega fan since the Mega Drive, or Genesis to you guys here in America. You know when you see a video online of some old nostalgic cartoon or whatever, and there in the comments is a "that was my childhood"? Yeah, that's me when it comes to Sega. I stuck with their consoles to the bitter end, and hung on to my Dreamcast until Sonic Heroes arrived on the GameCube, and I finally threw in the towel, and reluctantly accepted that Sega was finished as a home console maker. They didn't disappear entirely though. Throughout the 90s they'd built a dedicated fan base who stuck with their games as they pivoted to the role of third-party publisher, and that goodwill kept them alive in the hearts and minds of gamers the world over, ensuring the company's survival to this day despite some truly terrible games that would have otherwise sunk them in such an increasingly saturated and competitive market. The company is riding high right now with the third Sonic the Hedgehog movie, and deservedly so. It's a banger of a film, better than anything Sonic Adventure 2 fans could have dreamed of back in 2001. But were it not for the fans, it might never have happened at all. I'm quite proud to have been one of the many voices online that gave Paramount Pictures and Sega hell for the 2019 Sonic movie character design, and our collective bullying unquestionably saved the film from being dead on arrival, and resulted in arguably the best video game movie adaptations the world has ever seen. But behind the scenes, Sega has joined the dark side and become the latest gaming giant to turn its back on the fans who gave it life. From delisting beloved classic games to demanding the removal of ROMs from websites they'd historically turned a blind eye to, Sega has been on a quiet rampage in recent months. I theorized in the last video that perhaps Nintendo was behind it.
What now? Or you're fired. Understand? Fire.
But now, Sega of Europe and America CEO Shuji Utsumi has given some very insightful interviews to Eurogamer, The Guardian and the BBC that reveal the real reason for all the delistings and history erasure. Yes, you are reading that right. Sega is considering creating a subscription service of its own. On the surface, what's the big deal? Lots of companies are doing this now. It's a convenient way to play games and blah blah blah. If you're watching this, you're probably in my age range and you've lived it too and witnessed the enshittification of the games industry over the past 15 or so years firsthand. But a quick rundown for everyone else. Pretty much since the end of the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 and Wii era, game companies have gradually moved away from physical releases and selling games that you own, instead leaning towards game subscription services that amount to basically paying a monthly fee to rent games you'll never own, and when you do buy a game outright on a digital platform, you're actually only buying a license to play the game, not owning a copy of it yourself. So the revelation that Sega is talking about creating a subscription service right after delisting a mountain of classic games is all the proof we need that it isn't just being considered, it's being actively worked on and will be happening. It's a clear indication that Sega has drank the anti-consumer corporate greed Kool-Aid and would prefer that its fans pay a monthly bill to play their games rather than having them own what they buy. Not too dissimilar to their buddies at Nintendo, who killed off their virtual console service to instead push their Switch Online subscription service, or Microsoft, who shut down the Xbox Live Arcade storefront right before hiking up the price of their Game Pass subscription service. It's a repeating pattern that's been going on for years, bit by bit eroding consumer ownership rights in favour of corporate control over the things we buy. We've seen it happening with our movies and TV, our music, even the makers of our cars and appliances are somehow turning things that have never been subscription-based before into monthly bills going forward. I'm going to point you to this video from Mr. Lewis Rossman where he digs into the current state of digital rights management and subscription-based services and how consumers feel about them. His channel's really worth your time if you want to find out just how much you truly do not own the things you pay for.
So let's get this straight. They spent an insane amount of money on an expensive train. Check. They paid in full for the train. Check. The train has the ability to report the location back to the manufacturer. Check. The manufacturer can see where the train is at any given point in time. Check. The manufacturer can remotely disable the train that you bought and paid for. Check.
Mr. Utsumi has publicly stated in his interview with The Guardian that I'm not going for the mini direction, it's not me, I want to embrace modern gamers. So despite the massive success of the Sega Genesis Minis, a Saturn and Dreamcast Mini will not be happening. We are not a retro company, he concludes. We really appreciate our legacy, we value it, but at the same time we want to deliver something new, otherwise we'll become history. That's just not what we're aiming for. Sega might want to take a look at how this sort of position is working out for Ubisoft. Mr. Utsumi's statements are demonstrative of yet another company executive falling completely out of touch with their consumers. Don't get me wrong here, I'm all for the new upcoming Sega games that have been announced. Well, not so much the live service elements anyway. The idea of making the company really shiny again is music to the ears of Sega fans like me. But the logic these executives have of delisting older games to encourage sales of newer ones is fundamentally flawed. I went into great detail on this in the first video I did on Sega's recent antics, so instead of repeating those points, go check out that video to see exactly why older classics and modern entries can quite easily coexist and elevate franchises as a whole. But unfortunately, as I've said, this is a repeating pattern, and the executives at the top are, I'm sure, fully aware of how unpopular moves like this are. They just don't care.
You gotta squeeze every penny. Come on, let me hear you. Squeeze every penny.
Squeeze every penny. I'm squeezing it. Hey, I squeezed so hard it went into my hand.
And as for the modern gamers that Mr. Utsumi wants to embrace, well, they barely exist. Gamers both young and old are getting pretty fed up with the business models of the modern games industry and turning to older games in droves. I talked about this in more detail in the last video, so go check that out if you haven't yet. I'm a lifelong Sega fan, as I've said before, but these developments have caused me to seriously lose respect for them, and I know I'm not alone in that sentiment. The comments on their Genesis delisting announcement on Steam paint a pretty clear picture of how the fanbase feels. That is just a tiny sampling of the comments that are in that thread. People are unhappy. They've become as bad as Nintendo and friends. But Sega is just going to have to find out for themselves, since they value their legacy so much they want to rent it out. Meanwhile, the ranks of retro emulation enthusiasts will continue to grow, and game company executives will continue to lose the goodwill of their customers. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Ownership matters. If buying isn't owning, how can they reasonably say emulation is piracy? So I guess that's that. Sega is just another evil, greedy corporation now, and it's a genuine shame to see decades of history be wiped away in favour of another soulless, ad-filled subscription platform. Fortunately for us though, the emulation scene is strong, and indie devs will continue to do what the corpos won't. So emulate away! Until next time, you were the Retro Rebellion.